Welcome to Mixed Messages, a show where each episode we discuss someone's personal mixed race experience. I am your mixed race host, Sarah Donahue. Now, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Nicole, Nikki Bev. They call me Bev's Better School.
Woo! Oh yeah.
Yeah. Nicole, thank you so much for being here. And thank you for contacting me and saying, hey, I'm mixed. I have a story to tell. Have me on. Here you are.
Oh my God.
Go.
You're so welcome. Thank you, Sarah, for having me. I'm so excited to be here. And mixed kids unite.
Let's unite. Let's unite. Let's go and dive in. Nicole, tell me, what are you?
I'm a human, my love.
Oh my God. All right, we're done.
We're done. Question's over. It's a wrap.
Thank you for joining.
No. I had to throw that at you. But yes, in terms of my nationality, my ethnicity, I'm half Black American, half Iranian. So yeah, my dad was born and raised in the United States, Black American, and my mom emigrated to the US when she was 16 years old from Iran.
Okay. All right. Now, it's time for me to check myself right off the bat. What are you is the question that is most often, I feel, associated with mixed race people. And I think especially within the mixed race community, people are like, oh, I always get that. Me too. But there's a plethora of people, mixed race people, that don't get asked that question. And when you and I had a phone conversation prior to this, you said, I don't get it. I don't get asked that question. People assume I'm monoracial, I'm Black. So I want to know, I know what it feels like to get asked that question all the time. What does it feel like to be mixed and not get asked that question?
You know what? I think for me, it's interesting because I think your identities sort of trump one another depending on where you are and what you're doing. So for me, even though I'm from the United States originally, I'm currently in Cape Town, South Africa, which is where I have an apartment and I live here for most of the year. So because of that, people are less concerned about my race and more concerned about my nationality. So really, the question more often than not that I get, being American living in a different country, is where are you from? And that's what people, more often than not ask me. So the what are you question is really interesting because at least here and even in the United States, I'm Black presenting. So people will see me as Black. I think if you're part of the Black community, then people will be able to say, okay, you look mixed race or multicultural or multinational if you're part of the Black community. But if you're not, I'm just Black presenting. People just assume that I'm Black. But I will say that no one has ever come up to me and said, are you Iranian? So I'm still waiting for the day for someone to just walk up to me and be like, hey, are you Iranian? I'd be like, yes, I am. Because I don't present in that way.
Well, but have you been to Iran?
I have been to Iran. I have once when I was much younger, but I wasn't, I was 3 years old.
Okay, because I wonder if that would happen. You're saying when Black people see you, they're like, all right. Yeah, you're mixed. But I wonder if the flip side would be true.
Hopefully one day, inshallah, I will be in Iran. I'll be able to answer your question, Sarah.
I want to know, how does it feel to go with a part of you, to walk around with a part of you unseen?
That's such a powerful question. I think it's interesting because, for me, I don't need that sort of validation from the external world. I don't need the world to try and identify me. And I think in so many ways the world does, right? The world looks at me and tries to put me in this box and put me in that box. And I think that's an experience that a lot of people who are multicultural, multinational have.
I've seen interviews and read a lot of stuff. I've gotten into Nicole Bannister. I wanted to know a lot. And there are many times you refer to yourself as Black, which you should. You are. Have there ever been times where you refer to yourself as Persian?
If I'm Black presenting, it's difficult for me to very firmly just be like, I'm Persian, full stop. Maybe if I spoke language. I don't speak Farsi. Maybe once I learn Farsi, then I'll start telling people I'm Persian, period.
Maybe. And then when you do, you might get more what are yous, or really, or I've talked about this. We've talked about this on the show before. A lot of times white people assume I'm white, and I hear things, they, for whatever reason, often, a lot of times, sometimes, feel the need to let their racism fly, and thinking they're amongst white people, which I'm not sure why that's okay, because white people can also be offended by racism. But they're very quick to stop when I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm Black. Oh, yeah, I'm mixed race. Have you ever experienced that when people don't know that you're mixed and you've heard things or people have said things?
Yes. So Sarah, I'm going to take that back to the fact that I'm in South Africa.
Yeah.
Because I oftentimes say that I'm from the most institutionally racist country in the world, which is the United States, but I live in the most overtly racist country in the world, which is South Africa. So unlike the United States, where generally people attempt to be some sort of politically correct around their racism, in South Africa, they're not. In South Africa, white people will be like, oh no, like you're Black, you can't sit here. No, you must leave. It's that kind of overt level of thing. Or Black people will also be like, this is our country, white people, y'all can just move, right?
Okay.
So it's quite interesting, because what oftentimes happens to me here in South Africa in particular is that there's a disassociation between my Blackness as a Black American and South African Blackness. So I have heard white South Africans say extremely racist comments about Black South Africans to me, and they'll be like, oh, but yeah, we can say this to you because you're not one of our Blacks. You're a different Black. And I'm like, excuse me, I'm like, Black is Black is Black. Like, I'm like, I'm in solidarity with yo Blacks. So y'all need to go ahead and put those racist comments to the side.
I want to hear what you've heard.
I've heard things like, okay, Black people are stupid, Black people are uneducated. I've heard white South Africans saying things like, oh, well, Black South Africans like don't know how to work, that's why none of them have jobs. All sorts of just like absolutely ludicrous assumptions and misperceptions about the Black community here. And yeah, there's been a degree of people feeling comfortable saying that to me, because they're like, oh, but you're American, so that's different. And I'm like, no, I'm still Black.
Yeah, and the fact that they do feel comfortable. I mean, sometimes people don't care what you are. This is how they feel, and that's it. And I will say, I'm from West Virginia, and I've grown up with people being pretty straightforward, like, you're Black? No. Nope. I don't care what percentage you are. You're Black. You're not hanging out with my daughter. You're not coming into my house. Like, yeah. So I feel, depending on where you are, politically correct, but I have not been to South Africa, and I don't know about that. And thank you for letting me know about that. Is colorism happening over there?
Colorism is definitely a thing here, and it's the really treacherous legacy of apartheid, which was forced segregation between 4 distinctly created races. So you've got Black people, colored people, Indian people, and white people. Colored people ended up getting access to more resources, access to more education, access to more privileges than Black people did, because they were lighter skinned. So that still exists in South Africa, that colorism. The lighter you are, the more access to privileges you have than the darker skin.
Which is not foreign at all to America. I have noticed on your Instagram, at least, it says up top, Black Persian. Why did you put that?
So for me, it was almost like, I'm going to put this out there because I so strongly identify with my Black community. I so strongly identify with my Persian community and identities. since then, I've been able to identify a lot of mixed Black and Persian people through Instagram. So I'm glad I have it on there because they find me, I find them, and I'm like, oh, this is so interesting because everyone's experience is so different. But growing up, I didn't know any other Black and Persian like that mix. There's a lot of people who are mixed Black and white, Black and Asian, but Black and Iranian specifically was so rare. So that's why I put it on there. I'm like so proud of my identity and my two cultures.
That's great. And I love that you're having this community come at you like, me too, me too, me too. Let's talk about your family. I want to know first how your parents met.
Yeah, so they met in college. So it's actually like such a cute story. They were in South Dakota at the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology, which is such a random place that you would think a Black person, an Iranian person would meet. But I think that's why they did meet, because they were in South Dakota of all the states, right?
Yeah.
It was a very special sort of meet cute moment. My dad was captain of the basketball team, a senior, part of the fraternity, and my mom was this like hot young immigrant freshman who had just came there, and they were just sort of immediately drawn to one another. You know, for their spunk, for their difference, for their dynamism, and so yeah, they met in college, and the rest is history.
Did they stay in South Dakota?
Excellent question. No. So once my dad graduated and ended up getting a job, they moved around a little bit. They were in Louisiana a little bit. They were in California a little bit.
Where did you grow up?
Because my dad worked in oil, we bounced around quite a bit. So I was born in California. Then we moved to Texas, which is where my brother is born. Then we moved to Louisiana. Then we moved back to Texas. Then we moved to Singapore. So I spent my first 2 of high school in Singapore, and then we moved to California, and then I did my undergrad in Washington, D.C. at Georgetown, and during that time spent 4 months in Bolivia studying abroad, ended up going back to D.C. after Bolivia, and then I've been in South Africa since 2013, so almost a decade now. So I have really lived in multiple different country contexts, which is why I oftentimes call myself a third culture kid, because like not only am I mixed race, I also grew up in cultures that were entirely different from my mom's culture and my dad's culture.
What was your experience being Black and Persian in these places? Were some better than others? Were some worse? Did you feel like one you fit in more? Like, tell me about that.
I learned very quickly how to be a cultural chameleon. It was really humbling to be able to try and integrate into these different communities and make friends and eat new foods and learn new languages and explore new cultures, new dances.
Was there ever a place you lived that you were discriminated against because of your family and because of how you looked?
I think you cannot move through the world as a person of color without receiving discrimination. So every single place I've lived, every single place that I've been to in life, I've had some kind of discrimination, whether it was overt racism or the more subtler microaggressions. And I think the most sort of like pertinent story I can share is when I was in Singapore. And so again, this is my first year of high school. I'm 13, maybe 14 years old. And I was taking a taxi, you know, from my place into the city or into school or somewhere. And it was just me and the taxi driver, and it's a Singaporean taxi driver. And so he's talking to me and he was like, oh, your accent, like, where are you from? I was like, oh, I'm American. And he was like, Black American. I was like, yeah, I'm Black American. And then he goes, oh, so you're and he calls me the N-word.
Okay.
And I'm like 14, right? I'm like, okay. And so obviously my mind is racing. I'm like, how am I going to respond in this moment, right? But, and you know, for me, and I'm proud of my little wisdom as a young teenager, but for me, those experiences where I was like, okay, clearly you have no idea about Black culture, what that word means to Black Americans. You barely speak English, right? And your perception of the United States is clearly based around movies and music videos. So I told him, I was like, that's a really derogatory word in the United States. We don't use that word to refer to Black people, and you shouldn't either. You know, and that's just what I told him. My little 14-year-old self was like, I'm gonna check you today, but I'm not gonna be mean. I'm just gonna acknowledge that you probably have never met a Black person ever. And that's been a big part of me moving around the world to different spaces and different places, is really just acknowledging that people's understanding of Black people can be so limited. And if all you ever watch is music videos, then like, yeah, you probably think that we just call each other the N-word all the time,
Okay,
right?
yes, okay, all right. You make a point. You make a point.
Yeah, that's what rappers do. So I literally told the guy, I was like, what have you seen? He was like, oh, I just see MTV. Literally, he was like, I've only seen MTV. And I was like, okay, then that makes sense.
Nicole, I do not think at 14 I would have had that in me. I do not have that in me. But I did know that people were calling me that because they absolutely knew what they were saying. Tell me about your brother. He's younger, and he's your only sibling.
Yeah.
And how does he identify?
Same way that I do. And he too is similarly very involved in really pushing the needle forward on Black issues in particular. I think it's because, again, we're both very much Black presenting, despite feeling very connected to our Iranian roots and Iranian community. But particularly in the last couple of years with the Black Lives Matter civil rights movement that happened around, the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, it was something that we really had to sort of stand very firmly in our Black identity and push the needle forward on action and equity towards the Black community. Whereas right now, in particular, we're fairly more focused on the Iranian community because there's a massive women's rights movement happening in Iran right now. So it's very interesting, again, talking about intersectional identities and how we sort of stand up for the things that we identify with in the moment when it's really, really needed. When Roe versus Wade was overturned, I'm all of a sudden I'm like, well, my womanhood, right? My femininity is my most integral identity at the moment, to stand up, step forward with my fellow sisters and say, I believe in a woman's right to choose. So yeah,
people with a womb, people who yes,
birthing people. I believe in
birthing people.
Right to choose a person's right to give birth or not.
You have a seminar. Let me get this right. You have a seminar on how to navigate different cultures through different cultures.
Yes.
Do you address cultural appropriation?
There's two versions of it. One is a more in-depth version where I do tackle cultural appropriation. One is like the intro pack, the starter pack to navigate different cultures around the world. And in that one, I don't address it. But absolutely. I mean, it's just hard. Like in an hour-long seminar, how can you even scratch the surface of a cultural appropriation? But we try.
Tell me what you say.
Always give credit to the local communities and the local cultures in which you are participating in. Is
it possible for mixed people to appropriate one of their cultures, if not both, if not 3, 4, 5?
That's really interesting. I've actually never thought about that. And I think right off the bat, my first answer would be no. If you identify as a member of that community, then full stop, you are a member of that community. If you identify with them and have the cultural backing to prove it. Not if you just wake up one day and you're like, I'm Black. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. We've had situations, okay?
Well, yes.
You can't appropriate it if you're a part of it. I can see you wanting to explore it more and learn new things and try new things and wear new things. But that's part of who you are. It's in your blood.
Let's talk about skin color. My friend has a son, Black and white. White assumed, blonde hair, blue eyes, light skin. And his hair was going into dreads. And she was just like, I have to cut him out because I don't want him to be practicing cultural appropriation. I'm like, what? Okay. But if at first I was just like, well, that is part of his culture. But then at the same time, I was like, if he's assumed by many or most people to be white, and he has a hairstyle that is traditionally Black or African American, is it a cultural appropriation, or should he steer clear of that because it will be seen as cultural appropriation?
I see what you're saying. But at the end of the day, I think this is why, like even like I mentioned earlier, like my identity is defined by me. I know that I'm half Black and half Iranian, and if the world knows it or not, that's the them problem. That's not a me problem. So for that little boy, just because the rest of the world looks at him and thinks he's white, that's a them problem. That boy ain't white. He's mixed Black and white. So at the end of the day, if he wants to try and express himself through his Black identity, through his Black culture, through his Black parent, through a Black hairstyle or music, like let that little boy live. Like he better go and be
yes, amen. Amen. Yeah. Even in the past on this show, like one of my guests, Steve, he's grown up in Black culture. He never knew his white side of the family. He never knew his white father. And he said, I wish I could call myself Black, but because of my light skin, I feel like I have to say I'm Black biracial. I'm mixed with Black. I'm, and I just, yeah, I wonder about that.
Interesting. Again, I feel like at the end of the day, you know what your identity is, you know what your roots are, and if you stand firmly in those, like nobody can tell you nothing. Like that, this is who I am, whether you choose to see it, believe it, integrate it or not.
Things change, especially identities, and especially in the mixed community. You can, like, when I was growing up, I was told I was Black, period. And then, it shifts, Black biracial, Black and white, mixed, like, and that's, like you're saying, our prerogative.
Yep. And I mean, if you want to throw a real plot twist in there, this is something that I think is a very interesting conversation, and one that the mixed community and one that the Black community needs to have in particular, is the difference between Black and African American.
Now, yes.
Because this is something interesting that we could talk about. Because for me personally, and I've gotten into debates with all sorts of people about this. For me personally, I identify as Black American. I use that language very specifically to refer to Black American culture. I do not identify as African American, because actually, after having lived on the continent for a decade, I am not African. I can tell you that right now, after having understood and lived in African culture for so long, that is not the American experience. Unless you are first generation from the continent in the United States, or your parents are from the continent living in the United States, to me, those folks can identify as African American. Me personally, I'm Black American. And that's a very interesting conversation that I think not a lot of Black communities in the United States are having.
Let's talk about what you do and your jobs and how you got to be doing this. What happened? Break it down if you can.
Absolutely. So I think at my core, my two biggest passions are international travel and social impact.
And what?
And social impact.
All right.
And so I actually spent the first decade of my career doing that sort of work in international development and diplomacy. So I consulted with the United Nations. I've spoken at the United Nations headquarters in New York City. I worked for the US government. I served as a Peace Corps volunteer in South Africa. I was doing multilateral partnerships, connecting the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education to community-based organizations and corporations that were doing tremendous work for young people across Africa and the Western Pacific. I realized that there were a lot of restrictions on that sector and that industry because of racism, because of institutionalized racism, because the development industrial complex globally is dictated by the global North and by white people in the global North who think they know what's best.
Oh my God.
People who think they know what's best for the global South. And so for me, I'm American living in South Africa. So, on the one hand, I understand the systems of bureaucracy. I get that from the American perspective. Those are all the people, that's where all the money is. But on the other hand, here I am being Black, in South Africa, and seeing my South African, Zambian, and Zimbabwean peers and colleagues not being treated the same way that I'm being treated because they're African and not from the United States. As a person of color, I couldn't sit there any longer and deal with that.
When you quit, I'm guessing you told them why you quit.
Oh, girl, you better believe I'll send you my resignation letter. I told them about themselves. I had a long documented history of pointing things out and senior leadership blowing me off, saying that I was a troublemaker, giving me
All right. What? Were you the only person of color?
the global team, aka the leadership team, the team that was making decisions. I was the only non-white American.
Give me some examples that were shot down. How were you a troublemaker?
I had this one email I sent go viral because we worked across multiple different country contexts. The United States always changes the time, right? Like the United States has historically had a time change twice a year. Like we move an hour forward and we move an hour back. So there was an email sent out to the entire company from HR that said the time change is gonna the time, and this, mind you, this company was based in Vermont, in Norwich, Vermont. The email says that the time change means that there will be a 1 hour, earlier time difference between Norwich and Africa. There are 54 countries on the African continent and 3 different time zones. Are we talking about West African time, Central African time, East African time? Like, what's the difference here? And so I sent an email to the head of HR and said, hey, just wanted to let you know that generally when I like to refer places, I like to refer the same. So I like to refer a city with a city. So if you're going to use the term Norwich, the city, then use Johannesburg. And I said, oh, by the way, I'm confused. I mean, obviously I knew what was going on, but I was like, let me play stupid here. I'm confused by your email because actually there are 3 different time zones across the African continent. So can you please specify which time zone specifically you're referring to as there's going to be an hour time change? And it ended up getting forwarded to the CEO of the company. It ended up getting forwarded to the CMO. It ended up getting forwarded to the CFO, the CO, all the C's, the whole C-suite got this. And I ended up getting this like scathing performance review later that year that says Nicole doesn't give good feedback. Nicole doesn't know how to communicate to her colleagues and her peers. I mean, it was just absolutely ludicrous, and it was straight up racism because they were mad that I called them out. On their racism. I was like, you are just being straight up racist. That you were saying that Africa has 1 time zone. Like,
well, absolutely, and of course they got defensive because how could I be? But also, let's just. You asked a legitimate question. What times do you mean? Like, I know what you mean, but seriously, who exactly are you referring to?
Yeah, exactly. Like there were incidences of overt racism in our office and like the email still got referred to.
Give me an overt racism example.
So, an overtly racist incident was that we had a white South African contractor, so not a full-time staff, not a part-time employee, a contractor, who was in our office maybe 1 day a week, twice a week, come in and scream at our Black South African cleaning lady because she didn't clean the windows to his liking. And this was a woman who was an older woman, maybe in her late 40s, early 50s, who had been with the company for 10 years. And this is a contractor.
Yeah.
And he screamed at her.
And whatever. 10 days, 10 hours, never okay. Oh, God.
That guy didn't get fired.
No, of course not.
Up in arms. That guy didn't get fired. That woman didn't get compensated anything. She was never told sorry directly, from the CEO or from anyone.
Did you talk to her?
I of course talked to her. And a lot of other people did too. But I think because of the nuances, there's an inherent power dynamic when you have white American leadership and Black South African or Black Zambian staff. There's an inherent power dynamic because of nationality. And so because of that, it made it very difficult for a lot of folks in my office, a lot of people of color, to stand up and really say what they wanted to say. This is where I was very uniquely positioned because I was a person of color, so I can understand what the other people of color want to say, but I'm also American. So actually, at the end of the day, I can say some shit and get away with it because I'm American. I'm not worried about job security and safety in the way that like a lot of my South African and Zambian and Zimbabwean peers were. For a long time, I wanted to try and make the organization better. And I tried. I tried my best. And then at some point I was like, actually, it is not my job as as a mixed race person of color to teach white people about
and that's what that's the thing. It's exhausting. I don't know a person of color that isn't exhausted with educating white people why this is racist, why this is wrong. But also, in your experience, they knew. It wasn't like, let me learn, let me be an anti-racist, let me help. It was just like, I'm racist. How dare you call me a racist? You're demoted. You're in trouble. Look at this email. Oh my God. Tell me about what you do now.
Basically, after quitting the development sector, quitting that job, I was like, you know what? I'm going to be a TV show host. And everyone was like, what? And I was like, I love public speaking. I love connecting with people all over the world, different backgrounds, different cultures. And a year and a half later, I have an incredible show on YouTube called Started Up, which is all about social entrepreneurship, young people from different countries around the world pitching their business ideas to an elite panel of judges in the hopes of winning $40,000.
And you're still doing your dream. You're still at the core traveling and working for social justice and social change.
Yes, and on my terms, and in a way that's inclusive to the communities that I want to uplift and speak to and engage with. And it's just been like such a fun ride.
All right, Nicole, what haven't we covered? What do you need for people to know right now?
You know, all I need people to know is that at the end of the day, we need to work towards a more inclusive society. So at the end of the day, we need to understand the people who are different from us. We need to understand the people who look different from us, who speak different languages from us, who have different religions than us, who have different sexual and gender orientations than us. And if you can just take the time to have a conversation, have a dialogue with one person who's different from you, you don't have to travel to another country like I did to find people who are different from you. You can literally go to a different city, a different community, a different school, a different job, and you will find people who are different from you. Take the time to understand their lived experience. And so that would be, you know, my last shout out, the one thing I want people to know. And of course, you can follow your girl on Instagram at They Call Me Bands. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/@Nicole Bannister, AKA Nikki Bands. So come find me on Instagram, come find me on YouTube, They Call Me Bands. And, you know, we can be in this inclusivity journey together.
Yes. Yes, ma'am. All right. This has been Mixed Messages. Thank you so much, Nicole. They Call Me Bands, Nikki Bands Bannister.
Woo!
If you have any questions for the show, any comments, if you want to be a guest like Miss Nicole wanted to be, reach out to me. I am here. I want to know. All right. I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.